To extra AC. So hope you ladies brought a jacket, or any of you men that are cold-natured. All right. Good to see you this morning. This morning, Austin texted me in the middle of service and said, "So you're teaching this morning, right? Not me." And I was like, "No, it's you." I'm just kidding. I was giving him a hard time. Austin will be back next week to teach in Genesis. And so you're getting a whole 1-2 punch in the Old Testament here between the two of us. We don't even open up to the New Testament, so I guess eventually maybe.
Jesus wins. I know that's why.
Yeah.
Catch up on the rest of it.
That's right. That's in Revelation, right? Yeah, that's it. All right, so when you're looking at the book of Exodus, go ahead and open up to Exodus chapter 2. We need to recognize that Exodus is a second part of a 5-part series called the Pentateuch. Exodus is the second book in a series of books, okay? And so that's important. I wanted to do a couple preliminary things. Josh, I saw you came in. Last week you made a really good note, okay? Are you comfortable sharing that? Okay, so the book of Exodus in Hebrew is called Shemot, which means the names. And I made a point to bring that out last week. And Josh came up afterwards and had a really good point. And I asked him to share it this week.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, so we were talking about the names, and then we were talking about the lie later from the birth of the Hebrew kids and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to name it names, what's the first name? We talked about the first name is Jacob. Well, Jacob's name in Hebrew was changed to Israel. What happened to that? It changed to Israel after he had the dream and the struggle with the angel of God. And I got to thinking about it. Isn't that the human condition? Every single one of us, no matter what your background is, you struggle. Struggle with things physically, emotionally, morally, ethically, and ultimately you struggle with God. Which leads to why. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And it's one thing if you can look at a struggle, if you give somebody a problem to deal with, to struggle through without an answer, that's one thing. What's so incredible about our God, and I think a great way to separate it, maybe if you ever get in a discussion with people that think other gods or other humanistic things are the best way, or their God's better, or multiple gods or whatever, our God has a plan. Our God has a very secure plan that will lead you to overcome your struggles and to find peace. And it just kind of dawned on me. And it's what's so great through the Old Testament and into the New Testament. That's kind of the whole point. Is how do you deal with your struggles? How do you find peace? There's a plan. Now let's do it.
Thank you. That was excellent. I told him that you could make a sermon out of that. I mean, take that Sunday morning, you can preach that. That's and the book is about names. The first name that's named is Israel, as Josh mentioned. Today we're going to get a very important name in the book of Exodus. And it's going to be about our central character. Because you see, the book of Exodus turns for the next few chapters into a biography. And we want to ask the question, who is this person that Exodus is talking about, and what is he like? Okay? So it's about a person and his character. Exodus chapter 2. So what we need to do first is read through the text. And I asked this side of the room to help me last time. So this side, what I'd like to do is just read about 2 verses apiece. If you don't like to read in front of people, just say skip, that's fine. Or if you forgot your Bible, whatever. But I'll start, and we'll go through Exodus chapter 2, reading about 2 verses. And I'll go to you next, Meredith. Now, there was a man from the house of Levi who went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months.
When she could hide no longer, she took him for a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him.
Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children.
Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. So the girl went and called the child's mother.
And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because, she said, I drew him out of the water.
One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand.
When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, Why do you strike your companion? He answered, Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, Surely the thing is known.
When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had several daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock.
The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, How is it that you have come home so soon today?
They answered, An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. And where is he? Reuel asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him in to have something to eat.
And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses' daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land.
During that one period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And in their cry for help, because of their slavery went to God.
God heard their groaning, and he remembered his name in the paper of Isaac and of Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them.
Can I ask what version you were reading from, Aaron, just out of curiosity?
NIV.
NIV. Okay, most of us were reading from the ESV, I noticed. And I'll pull out a couple things that translations do differently. All right, so that last phrase, the ESV reads, And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. I like how the NIV does that. It's a little more dynamic, but that's literally what the Hebrew says. And that'll be important a little later. Good reading. Thank you for your help. I appreciate it. I'm the kind of teacher that likes a little interaction, so I appreciate your help, and I'll pause for questions and comments throughout. So first off, let's jump right in. A man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. Well, to us, that's not very, okay, a Levite. What is the author saying by including this in there? What does his original audience think of when they think of Levi? Do you have a thought, Mike?
They're qualified to be priests.
Yeah, they're qualified to be a priest. So this can get a little confusing, but think about this. The book of Exodus was written to the people of Israel, but they would read this after the priesthood and the laws and their society had already been established, okay? So by the time they come back to read this, they know what a Levite is. A Levite is a special person who's set apart for God. So the narrator's saying, this person is special. He's a little different. And this verse basically assures the readers that Moses was pre-qualified for the service that God put him to. Okay? Fair enough. So let's move on. There's this whole plan of his mother. She's going to save her son by placing him in a basket and putting the child in the river. I've done a lot of reading for this particular passage. I can't really figure out what her plan was. I'm not really sure what the point was. What's he going to do in the river? I know he's going to float, but I'm not really sure how that's going to help him. And commentators seem to be kind of confused about what the end goal is. But in some sense, she's trying to rescue him. We don't really know. But she hid him for 3 months, and then she places him into an ark. Okay, so if anybody says that Moses didn't have an ark. He did. It's the same Hebrew word as Noah. It is. He was in an ark. And the ark is covered with the same substance as it is in Genesis. So yes, Moses had an ark. So don't let anyone mess with you about that one, okay? Yes, sir.
She lived in the neighborhood. She was the Pharaoh's daughter, hung out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if she lived nearby, it's possible that she knew Pharaoh's daughter was there, so maybe her plan was, I don't know, what happened? Maybe she tried to get her son adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. That could be. The text doesn't really tell us what her plan was. It just says what she did. So, okay.
Speculating.
Yeah, speculating. That's all right. We can speculate about the text. All right, so this is the best. This is great, okay? So I think this is like the essence of capitalism, okay? So she had her own baby, all right? And in order to save it, she sends it to Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter then pays her to nurse the baby, who was her own baby. And then she gives her baby back to Pharaoh. Isn't that great? I love that. I don't know. There's just something about that. You're like, God is in control of this situation. God is watching out for this child. But it's interesting. It says in the text that Pharaoh's daughter took pity on the baby. Chapter 2, verse 5 says that. You see, this was a woman who was not inclined to her father's cold-blooded plan to kill all of the Israelites. She had pity and compassion on the baby, and she accepted the baby. All right, I don't have plans to spend a lot of time on this story of her taking the baby in. I want to touch a little bit on verse 10, but I'm saving a lot of time for the end of the lesson. So if it sounds like I'm going fast, that's what I'm doing. Do you have any questions about this section before? Oh, goodness, wow. Yes, ma'am.
So we hear about Aaron later.
Mm-hmm.
Where is he in this? Is he younger than Moses? Is he older than this decree?
That's a great question, because the way this story tells, that's not how you should say that. The way this story is told, it sounds like Moses is the first child, but he's not. We find out later he has an older brother and an older sister. So it's not clear why they tell it this way, just maybe Moses was really special, and so this story is focusing in on him. So.
Well, at the end of chapter 1, that's when Pharaoh says, kill every boy.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the older brothers and sisters were not included in that?
That's true. Maybe they were
Isn't that
old
what
enough.
That's what Herod did?
Yeah.
Quick, there's a new baby in town, let's kill all of them.
Mm-hmm.
All the baby boys.
Yeah, so maybe he was old enough to have survived that. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or thoughts?
I just thought it was cool that Moses was carried in an ark, and then he ended up building God an ark that was about the same size.
That's true. Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant. Interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there's some kind of illusion going on there, and maybe I should pull that out a little later. I need to include Tom in my lesson preps, and he'll get me a good connection there. So the only, yes sir, go ahead.
So in verse 2,
Mm-hmm.
when the woman becomes pregnant, she gives birth to a son. When she saw that he was in my version, it says healthy child.
A healthy child.
So is the only reason she saved him because he was a healthy child?
So it's a little confusing. The Hebrew says that he was Tov. Tov just means good. Like Boker Tov means good morning in Hebrew. The text just says that he was good. She saw that he was good. And so it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know what she saw. It seems like there's this pattern in Old Testament that characters who are special look different. Saul was taller than all other men. David was ruddy in appearance, which is, to us, we don't really know what that means. But for them, it meant that he was very attractive. And so, I don't really know. It's just a theme in the Old Testament that some of these special people that God uses, it just says that they're good looking. I don't know, or they're Tov, whatever that means. Uh-huh.
Austin, Genesis, could it be an allusion to when God created and saw that it was good? Would the wording be
is the wording supposed to reflect that, to carry that thought forward that this is God's servant?
I think so.
Ah, you should have come out and said it, Austin.
I was just setting you up a T-ball to see what you
Swing and miss.
And then when you didn't say anything, I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay, so maybe it's a correlation to what God saw in creation, that it was good.
Well, yeah, I think that she's seeing it and she's realizing that God has a plan.
Okay.
Whether or not she knows it's to save all of Israel, that she sees that the right thing to do with this, that this is a good situation to not kill the child.
And she cares about her son. Yeah.
I think there's some more creation imagery there,
Mhm.
and Moses being drawn out of the water.
Yes. That was the exact point that I was going to make, Mike. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, you're right. So the naming of Moses is very important. So in verse 10 it says, when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because, she says, I drew him out of the water. So Moshe is his Hebrew name, and it sounds like to draw out. And so it's just a play on words. But what is the significance of this name, Moses, to draw out? What do you think is the correlation with his character, with his person? Yeah. Yeah, he draws the people of Israel out. Moses is a redeemer, a person that is going to come along to save the people of Israel, to bring them out of their misery. And this name is very significant.
Just to be clear, in that idea when it says she named him Moses, Pharaoh's daughter?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who is Egyptian?
Mm-hmm.
Who believes on the other side of the Nile is the afterlife, and the things from God come out of the what? They're polytheistic God, right?
Isn't that curious?
Is there a nervousness that she's thinking, oh, this is a gift from God, one of these Egyptian gods?
Mm-hmm.
Or, no, it's actually a gift from the God.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Why does she name and not the parents? That's a curious question. And they save the naming of the child till the very end of this section. Like normally you would say, and the child was born, and they named him so-and-so. But they don't say that. They say there was a child to some parents. He was adopted by some daughter of Pharaoh, and his name was Moses. That's kind of how the story goes. And I don't know why she gets to name him. Uh-huh.
Also interesting, she maintained his ethnicity by giving him a Hebrew name. Like, she didn't give him an Egyptian name, at least not according to this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if it's a play on words, it's a Hebrew word, which means she maintained his ethnicity.
That's what it appears. And interestingly enough, as Moses grows up, he looks on the outside to be Egyptian. He wears Egyptian clothes. He grows up as an Egyptian. And the story tells us later that he looks like an Egyptian, in more or less, in less words, but it tells us that he looks like an Egyptian. Uh-huh.
So how did she know, the Pharaoh's daughter know when she plucked him out of the river, that it was a Hebrew child?
Circumcised.
Do you want to know?
That makes sense, totally.
Yeah, he's probably circumcised because
Okay, you have like a nose.
yeah, because he's over 3 months old, and they were generally circumcised on the 8th day was their custom, handed down from Abraham. So yeah, he's probably circumcised. Okay, one more question, then we got to move on. I think you had your hand up first.
I think there's a correlation with an Egyptian cognate in the drawn out because of Ramses drawn out of the sun.
I have heard of a cognate, but I'm not really sure, so I can't really speak to that. I didn't do a lot of studying in it. So, all right. I said one more. Hannah, did you have a question?
I just was trying to figure out if he was nameless for a while.
His name, they didn't kid. Hey, kid.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how the story goes. I'm not really sure. All right, so let's move on to verse 11. How do you like this? It says, one day when Moses had grown up. Well, how do you like that for storytelling? You got a little 3-month-old baby, and then boom, Moses is grown up. No detail. There's nothing about his education. The story right now doesn't tell anything about his personality, doesn't tell anything about Pharaoh's daughter, the kind of environment he grew up in. It just says, one day, he grew up. All right, well, there you go. How you like it? So, when you're reading stories in the Old Testament, pay attention to how much time they give to certain elements, okay? Moses' education, his life from a baby until however old he is as an adult, they don't focus on that. But what is important is what comes next. So focus in on that. Ask the question, what kind of person was Moses? It says, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to, what's the word? His people. And actually the Hebrew says, ahava, or ahavu, it's his brothers. He went out to his brothers. So notice, Moses dresses like an Egyptian, the story tells us later. To outward appearance, he's an Egyptian. But he is a person who cares about his people. He identifies with the Israelites. All right. He looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So there's a play on words here that you don't get from the ESV. The Egyptian, not a play on words, sorry, there's a consistency here. The Egyptian was attacking a Hebrew, and so Moses attacked him. They use the same word. And it's that idea of justice in the Old Testament, an eye for an eye. That what is done to you is what justice, or how should I say that? What happens to you as a victim is the justice that is meted out to the person who committed the crime. Does that make sense?
Non-escalation.
Yeah, the law of non-escalation. Tom? Mm-hmm.
So then by this reading, then Moses runs into problems when he also walks like an Egyptian.
Did you make a joke? Because it just went over my head, and everybody's laughing like it was a joke.
Like the song Walk Like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian, he dressed like an Egyptian, but then when he walked like an Egyptian,
Okay. I'm just going to pretend like I know what song reference you're making, okay? I'm going to pretend like I'm cool. I'm sorry, Tom. So, all right, let me ask you this. Do you want to get into this debate here about Moses' action? Was it right or wrong, or should we just move on? Just move on?
Nobody seemed to think it was wrong before he did it.
He looked this way and that. So does that mean that Moses had a guilty conscience before he did this act?
He's crossing the street.
He was crossing the street. That's what it was. What's that? Yeah. Okay. So it appears there's some kind of shame there. Could you read, he looked this way and that, without this guilt context?
Well, there's another person there, and it's a 2-on-1 fight, and you're not going to win that. So.
That is possible. He's assessing the situation. He's like, all right, how many Egyptians are here? So if I do something, are they going to gang up on me? It's possible to read it that way. Do you have thought?
Yeah, I think he might have just wanted to raise his reputation with the Jewish community to be a hero in the Jewish community, basically.
Sure, that's possible too. To be a deliverer.
You mentioned earlier the name Levi. Well, the reference in Genesis, the most recent reference to Levi, was his violence. I don't know if there's any correlation there, but it says Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their sword.
Yeah, that was Israel's blessing and or curse on his sons.
So I don't know if that carries through in the story at all, but that's the most recent reference to Levi.
I had never even gone there, Stephanie. That's a good thought.
I mean, you mentioned you jumped from talking about what did he do, how was he raised? Well, he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up eating 3 to 5 square meals a day.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up to be a warrior. He grew up either him or his brother, turned out his brother ended up becoming the next Pharaoh. One of them was going to have to learn how to fight. One of them was going to have to learn how to be a leader. He saw his dad probably kill thousands of people for not paying attention. probably worried about getting in trouble. But he knew that he needed to do something.
Yeah.
So something's nagging at him.
Yeah. Yeah, and the heart of Moses, I think, is demonstrated in this. You said it was nagging at him. The heart of Moses is that
I would say struggling. He was struggling.
Yes. I like that. He cares about people that cannot defend themselves. He cares about the burdens of Israel. He has a heart for them. And I think that's what this story is focusing on, is that Moses is a person that cares about Israelites. So I want to pull out a note here that you might not make. Moses is acting in the same way as God does in this story. Moses looks on his people with compassion, and this viewing of their distress moves him to begin the process of deliverance. These are his people, literally his brothers. He may look like an Egyptian on the outside, but on the inside, he's an Israelite. And what is Israel's response to Moses' attempt at deliverance? What do they say? They say, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us?" I always read that as such an ironic statement. Because who made Moses a prince and a judge? Well, actually, God is in the process of making Moses a prince and a judge over them. Isn't that ironic?
I think their response is kind of appropriate based on what he did, because in a sense, he's kind of taking matters into his own hands. And it's like he's acting without God's blessing or command. And it's like there's a sense that this is inappropriate, and their response kind of recognizes it.
Yeah, and that's certainly one way to read the text. I think as you read the text as a biography, the question is not as much, was Moses right or wrong in this action? The question is, what kind of person is Moses? And I think the answer that the text is giving us is, Moses is a person that cares and wants to deliver people, even if right now God is not backing him and it's a failure.
This is just kind of like a technical question, but like in the text it talks about, how Moses saw an Egyptian being a Hebrew. At what point does like the term Hebrew then change to Israelite? Like, is it when like God gives them the law and establishes them as a nation? Like, what's that like transition, if that makes sense? Or
Yeah.
is that, I don't even know if that's like.
We're in a transition right now in the book between a family and a nation. And this is the process of God making the family of Israel into the Israelites, or the Hebrews. And those are kind of synonymous. But you're asking a good question. These are a people who are finding out, who are we as a people? What is important to us? And that's where God steps in and begins the process of teaching them what ought to be important to them as a people. So one note I want to make before we move on to verse 16 is, so Moses committed this act, and Moses was afraid. All right, I told you I'm doing my thesis on fear in the book of Exodus. So I want, real quick, give me a comparison. How is this fear of Moses different than the fear in chapter 1, verse 17? The midwives feared God, and here it says Moses was afraid. What's the difference in those two fears?
It's the same Hebrew word?
Yeah, same word. Same word, yeah.
Fear of God is empowering, and the fear of men is debilitating.
Yeah. Empowering versus debilitating. I should write that down. That's a good one. I'm really just getting ideas for my thesis right now, so I don't have to do work later.
Make sure he gives you credit for that.
Yeah. Anything else on the difference between these two fears?
Biologically, they're two very different things, because the fear of God is not actually a biological response. You are simply, basically submitting and respecting something. It's like, in my job, like I work with high cases of fear. Like there's a physical biological response where people will start trembling, and like you can actually see when someone's afraid, like their brain goes up.
Yep.
There are physical signs. So it's the biology.
Store these categories in the back burner, because these are going to be important as we go through the book of Exodus. All right, so that's all I wanted to do there. Put that back there. All right, so there's a priest of Midian and we're getting close. Got about a few minutes left here. Got about 10 minutes left, so I want to spend a little more time on the end. But there's a priest of Midian, and the story is like, okay, what's going on here? Like, Moses was in Egypt, and now he's in Midian, and now he's watering flocks. Like, what's the point? Again, let's ask, what is this story telling us about the character of Moses? Okay? So these people are persecuted by shepherds. Verse 17 says, "But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock." So what is this telling us about the character of Moses once again? He cares.
Moses doesn't like bullies.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't like bullies. He cares about the people that cannot care for themselves. That's in the heart of who Moses is. That comes out in the law over and over and over again. Moses cares about the persecuted. And I think that's the main point of this story, is that Moses stood up for them and Moses saved them. I want to point out one more thing. He got married to Zipporah, and his wife gave birth to a son and named him Gershom. He said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." What's the significance of that naming? What does that tell you about the character of Moses?
His heart is still with the Israelites. He doesn't consider this home.
Yes, his heart is still with the Israelites. Now, I'm skipping over a bit because we've had some really good discussion. When they go back and tell their father, they said, "An Egyptian delivered us." That's how I know that Moses looks like an Egyptian, because he delivers them, and apparently he didn't speak to them because they had no idea that he's not actually Egyptian. They just assume by his outward look. So on the outside, Moses looks like an Egyptian. But the naming of his son Gershom is saying, I'm actually a foreigner. Moses attempted deliverance and failed. And now he's a foreigner in a foreign land. I want to read you a summary of Moses' life so far, and it's a little depressing, okay? He was a failure as a deliverer of his people, a failure as a citizen of Egypt, unwelcome among either of the nations he might call his own. He was a wanted man, a permanent resident of an obscure place, alone and far from his origins, and among a people who is different. His character, as we have seen, was clearly that of a deliverer. His circumstances offered no support for any calling appropriate to that character. It would surely require an amazing, supernatural act of a sovereign God for this washed-up exile to play any role in Israel's future. How do you like that? How does that strike you? I think that's an accurate summary of the story so far. All right. In the last 5 minutes, I want to focus in on this final phrase. And I didn't save as much time for it as I thought I was going to. But you guys had some good discussion, so I appreciate it. All right. Listen to this verse. Focus in on the heart of what's being said here. During those many days. As I prepared for this lesson, I thought over and over again, during those many days, do you hear the difficulty? Do you hear the struggle that Israel is having? Do you hear their pain? The text says, during those many days. The king of Egypt died. Well, there's some hope. Perhaps when he dies, the next Pharaoh that arises will be kinder. But what does the text say? The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery. This is a PG-13 word. So I think we're all adults in here. I'm going to read to you Ezekiel chapter 20 that uses this same word groaning. And it's going to give us a picture of what this word means, okay? So listen for the word groaning. I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon. I will place my sword in his hand, but I will break the arms of Pharaoh, and he will groan like the fatally wounded before the king of Babylon. That's a pretty violent word, groan. And it's connected to violence that is done to the people of Israel. They're groaning because of physical pain. Now watch what the camera does. The camera pans from this wide view of the people of Israel to this groan. And it's almost like a little vapor that you see go up to heaven. And the camera pans up to heaven, and it looks at God. And it says, their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. All right, and hear this. God heard their groanings. God heard it. The word is Shema. God heard. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. To hear doesn't just mean that your ears are working. It means that God understood their pain. God cared about their pain. God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant. Did God forget the covenant? Was it gone from his memory? Oh man, that covenant. I forgot about that. I guess I better do something. No, the Hebrew word, remember the covenant, is a phrase you will see all over the Old Testament. And it begins here. When God remembers his covenant, it means that he's about to act on behalf of his people. He's about to do something miraculous for his people. God remembered his covenant.
In my family, my wife's the one who keeps track of time. And so I always know when something is happening that I didn't remember because she does remember. It wasn't that she ever forgot. It's just that when she remembers, then she acts. And I see, oh, she acted because she remembered this was the time. In Scripture, we see that God a lot has a schedule. And that schedule is part of his perfect plan. And we see that manifested in that instant of memory that he doesn't allow to pass by.
That's right. And when it says that God remembers, God hears, it's a statement not just of a mental faculty, but it's a statement of movement. God is about to move. All right, so what does it say? It says that God heard, God remembered. And what does verse 25 say? God, he saw. That's the same as Moses. He saw the people of Israel. And I made a point of this earlier. The Hebrew says, and God knew. And the final statement in this chapter is that God knew. And I want to rest there for a moment because when we approach this text, I think sometimes we're so distant from this that we can't relate to the people of Israel. But I think we can relate to pain. We can relate to difficulty and to struggle and things in our life that hurt, that could bring tears to our eyes if we just thought about them. And the book of Exodus is reminding us God is not distant from that pain. To the Israelites, it sure looked like God was distant. During those many days, it looked like God was distant and God didn't care. But this text is reminding us that in that pain, God hears, God remembers, and God knows. And in your own life, I want you to remember that God cares about you. God knows the pain that you're going through. And that God is there to act powerfully in our lives, just as he did for the people of Israel. All right, let me pray. Father, I thank you that you are close. You are not a God who is far off, who is up in heaven disconnected from us, but you're a God who sees, who remembers, who knows our pain. We praise you for that. Thank you that you care about us and that you are active in our lives. In your name, amen. Thank you very much.